Taking a look at the White House on this evening in which the United States and Israel are on day 3 after an attack upon Iran, a conversation about what defines war and what comes next. That is what we're doing tonight here on the show. Today, President Donald Trump said U.S. airstrikes on Iran would take 4 or 5 weeks, but could last for, quote, whatever it takes. The Pentagon said 6 U.S. service members have been killed so far. President Trump has said he would consider sending ground troops into Iran if necessary. That's a quote at the end. Iranian state media reports more than 500 people have been killed. Iran has attacked 8 other countries in the region thus far. Evan Kozlov has the latest from Washington, D.C.
This was our last best chance to strike.
President Donald Trump on Monday making his first public appearance since the U.S. and Israel attacked Iran on Saturday. In an operation that killed the country's supreme leader and many other top officials. The president saying on Monday that this operation will likely last weeks.
Right from the beginning, we projected 4 to 5 weeks, but we have capability to go far longer than that.
The president outlined 4 main objectives: targeting Iran's missile capabilities, quote, annihilating the country's navy, preventing Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons, and stopping the regime from funding regional proxies. The president did not call for regime change on Monday.
The hour of your freedom is at hand.
That's despite urging Iranians to, quote, take over your government in remarks on Saturday, shortly after the attacks began. U.S. and Israeli strikes have killed at least 550 people in Iran, according to an estimate by the country's Red Crescent Emergency Service. And the Iranian regime has responded by launching missiles and drone attacks targeting U.S. bases, Israel, and allies across the region. At a briefing Monday, Pentagon leaders said more loss of life from U.S. service members is possible as the attacks continue.
As the president warned, an effort of this scope will include casualties. War is hell, and always will be.
We understand the risks of this mission and the weight of the responsibility that we carry.
And a new front in the war has also opened in Lebanon, where the Iran-backed militia Hezbollah fired on Israel and Israel struck back. Lebanon's government reporting dozens of deaths.
And this war is also causing a spike in the global oil prices, which traded at the highest level in over 8 months. Iran is currently restricting access to the Strait of Hormuz. 1/5 of the global oil goes through this vital channel. Reporting here in Washington, I'm Evan Kozlov, Spectrum News.
And many parts are now in play, always seeking understanding in a moment like this. We're lucky to be joined for analysis and latest developments by Benjamin Radd, Senior Fellow at the UCLA Berkeley School and Center for International Relations, also a lecturer at Global Studies at the UCLA School of Law. And Professor Radd, I know you've been in classes all day, and yet you're one of the most informed people we can imagine having on right now. So just give us a sense then of where we stand now, day 3, going into day 4 after those initial strikes, and also what history tells us about a moment like this.
Yeah, glad to be here with you, Omri. Well, despite the decapitation efforts that began Saturday, that started the war, we still have the regime, or at least some remnants of it, intact. It has not yet collapsed. They're still demonstrating that they have the capability to strike back and throw everything they have at a broad range of targets, some of which don't make sense maybe to the outside observer, but at this point, trying to increase the pain threshold and make it costly for the U.S. and its allies to stay in this conflict, and maybe hopefully, from the Iranian side, bring it to an end soon. And that basically leaves us with a timetable that's now shifted. I think initially what might have been completed in an earlier stage, a few days, maybe a week, now can extend possibly 3-4 weeks. The president giving us a timeline of up to 5 weeks. I think that's maybe realistic as well. A lot of this depends on what is Iran's stockpile of ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, these Shahed drones we've seen used to devastating effect. We don't know, and I think that's going to dictate a lot of where this goes.
And also trying to understand this, we're trying to understand our reasons for getting into what we can essentially call a war at this point. Secretary of State Marco Rubio was speaking this a little bit, saying we've come across intel that suggests that Iran would attack the U.S. or Israel if anyone attacked them. And then he went on to say this.
And so the president made the very wise decision. We knew that there was going to be an Israeli action. We knew that that would precipitate an attack against American forces. And we knew that if we didn't preemptively go after them before they launched those attacks, we would suffer higher casualties and perhaps even higher those killed.
Essentially, we are going to war because Israel was going to attack Iran, and so we preemptively went in. What is the sense from the neighboring countries, the region, and the broader community of that rationale for the war?
Well, it does. I mean, that's an interesting phrasing that the secretary gave. It does make it seem that this, the decision by Israel to do so forced the American government's hand to respond, or at least to preemptively respond to any possible Iranian provocation. And I think what it does is, I mean, and we've seen conflicting reports in the last few weeks. On the one hand, we saw the Saudis pushing against a conflict with Iran. We saw Prime Minister Netanyahu, excuse me, making the same request, pushing against any U.S. operation. And then also now, we heard about a week before the conflict started that the Saudis were in fact in favor of a strike against Iran. I think what it demonstrates is that Iran remains, notwithstanding the war that started on Saturday, remains this destabilizing force, a destabilizing presence with the ability to bring about a range of headaches and problems for not just U.S. allies, but also for anybody in that region. And so from the perception of the Americans, this is a threat that, whether it's imminent as if it's happening tomorrow or imminent as if a few months down the line, it needs to be addressed. And now the region is bearing the consequences of that.
And bearing the consequences, and also bearing this sort of asymmetrical absorption of the resources involved. And I just wonder if you can give us a sense ultimately of that disparity. For instance, in Iran sending missiles at a certain cost and a certain length of time to produce a missile versus the intercepting technology in UAE. I saw some analysis that suggested, what they have in terms of interceptors cost far more. And UAE may not have a financial problem, but also it takes a long time to create that stockpile and manufacture those intercepting missiles. So just how long can this war of attrition going on, especially since Iran's strategy now is simply to send all these missiles out and wear down and deplete those intercepting reservoirs?
That's an excellent point. The data that I've seen says it's a 20-to-1 cost ratio. So, for example, if it cost $1 million for an Iranian ballistic missile to be manufactured and launched, it costs $20 million to create a interceptor that can knock it down. And even then you have, in the case of the UAE, a 93% success rate, which is remarkably high, but that 20-to-1 ratio cannot endure. And that's not just a cost issue, like you said, it's the manpower and the factories needed to produce these things. It takes a long time. So from Iran's perspective, this can turn into a war of attrition. Can it drag this out with these sort of sporadic strikes enough to really wear down everyone's will and physical resources? And that becomes the issue. So I think what we're seeing from the U.S., why we've seen the huge number of sorties and the operations by the Israelis, is to take out the missile depots, to take out the stockpiles, especially the underground facilities. That's why we saw the B-2s used, to use those bunker busters to hit those missiles that Iran is storing deep within mountainsides or beneath the ground, because they understand that time is on Iran's side in this case. If they drag this out, it becomes much more painful, much costlier for the U.S. and the Arab states and Israel.
And perhaps one of the reasons that President Trump put this 4 to 5 week timeline on, though he said that the U.S. is capable of going far longer. And again, it depends on how the United States has defined the objectives. And one of these essentially 4 objectives is to stop and prevent Iran from being a sponsor of regional terrorism and these proxy groups. How could the U.S. government achieve that objective other than complete regime change? And what is the leadership of Iran looking like right now, given that we know that the supreme leader is gone and also a few layers beneath, apparently?
So, we don't have visibility into essentially what's happening on behind the scenes. There is a constitutional mechanism for them to pick a new supreme leader. But again, this has really only been tested at a time when the previous supreme leader was alive and had designated a successor. So we don't have that option now. I mean, maybe Khamenei left plans for who he wanted to be next, but whoever it is, do they have the credibility? Do they have the legitimacy as a Shia cleric, which is a important factor here and one that the Constitution requires? And then, beyond that is, the question of how do you stop, to your question about stopping proxy groups. I mean, short of regime change, it's to basically completely choke off Iran's ability to bring in any revenue. And that means going after its oil refineries, the energy sector, completely shutting down the Strait of Hormuz. But in doing so, you are also then, it's collective punishment against the population. But that, in that sense, you're basically, preventing them from profiting in any way off of the oil that they managed to smuggle and transport out, and reducing what they're able to provide to their proxy groups. Because already flights that are carrying resources and ammunition and cash, those can be identified and shot down, but it's ships and cargo that they need to get out of the ports that can be stopped. That hasn't been done yet.
You're laying out a series of very difficult decisions that the United States government, in partnership with Israel, apparently, and perhaps others, will need to make in the days and hopefully just weeks to come. It'll be an interesting timeline. It'll be interesting to see it play it out. You'll be a very busy person, sought after for your advice and counsel. We really appreciate you coming on the show tonight.
Thank you, Emory.
Always great to have you. That's Benjamin Radd, a scholar of this region ultimately, and obviously someone who understands the moving parts to the extent possible. Some very difficult conversations yet to have with respect to that war effort. And more come up here on ITI. Stay with us.